Hello, everyone. My name is Soledad Davis. I'm the founder of Psychosematica, an educational platform about astrology, psychology, and the studies of consciousness. And today I have the huge privilege to engage in a conversation with Dr. Rupert Sheldrake and Dr. Richard Tarnas with the purpose of building, I hope, new bridges between science, psychology, and spirituality based on the work of Richard Tarnas on archetypal cosmology and astrology, and the work of Rupert Sheldrake and his hypothesis of morphic fields and morphic resonance, but also his research on telepathy and extended mind. So hi, Richard, hi, Rupert. It's a pleasure to have you here again, and this time together. Thank you.
Thank you, Soledad.
Thank you.
And it's good to see you, Rupert, as well.
Okay, I know that with this conversation, we are perhaps entering into a quite controversial zone for academic and scientific research. And that is why I would like to approach this conversation as a participatory inquiry, like an exploration capable of opening our minds more than giving final conclusions. I think that you will agree with this. And for the first question, I'd like to rely on the idea of collective unconsciousness, and that for Jungian thought seems to be a kind of psychological memory of human species that shapes and informs the habits of human experience, our patterns of behavior, and even the process of psychological development itself. And accordingly, Rupert, you suggest something similar with your hypothesis of morphic fields, but I think that you also go beyond and expand this idea to all species, suggesting that memory is inherent in nature itself and not only human. But what about when we introduce the cosmic level of planets and stars? What is the approach of archetypal cosmology, and how could you relate planetary archetypes and morphic fields?
Rick, I think you should go first.
All right, I'll take an attempt at this. You've actually sketched out a complex mystery there, Soledad, and several different approaches, because even Jung himself was a complex thinker who evolved in the course of his life, and he also didn't always resolve his certain contradictions that he had in his thinking. So when the collective unconscious was his expansion of the personal unconscious that Freud had formulated, and I think Jung makes a very strong case for the fact that there are very powerful unconscious factors which he sees as being archetypally informed, and we can go into the meaning of archetypal later. Just thinking of them as kind of enduring formal structures that pattern and shape human experience in various ways and behavior. But he also, it's quite true that he began thinking of this in terms of something that was unconscious and was as human in its boundaries in a certain way, except that he also was enough of an evolutionist that he felt there's a deep relationship to nature, but he was also he was something of a nature mystic himself, and he was constantly kind of in a dialogue within himself between the kind of more mainstream conventional scientific constraints that human consciousness is consciousness is exclusive to human beings and to the complex human brain. And then this other sense that he had that which became stronger and stronger, that the archetypal unconscious, or really would be better to call it the archetypal psyche, is something that transcends the human consciousness, that we are in it rather than it is in us. And his exploration of synchronicities in particular pointed to the fact that these archetypal patternings and purposes and intelligence seems to be at work in the larger matrix or field of all of nature, and no longer just the intrapsychic human subject. One other thing is, I think in many of our thinking, we have recognized that unconscious is not a noun properly. It's an adjective about a particular state, and what we call unconscious may be unconscious for us right now, or but may not be unconscious to a tribal indigenous society, for example, in living in Colombia or Peru or Brazil, or it may be accessible to us in an extraordinary state of consciousness, such as in an ayahuasca journey or a spontaneous spiritual awakening. So, in that sense, the term that many of us have come to use more and more about the collective unconscious or the archetypal unconscious is anima mundi, which has a kind of the soul of the world. It recognizes that in a way that uses the Latin language, which has a certain numinous quality for our culture. Anima mundi recognizes the pervasiveness of a panpsychic universe, and the fact that the human archetypal unconscious is embedded in that and participates in that. And then the added evidence from the astrological field, astrological research, whether it's in history or the kind of stuff, the research that Stan Groff and I have done over the years with respect to the psychedelic sessions and the correlations between people's psychedelic experiences and their birth charts and their transits. All those point to the fact that the macrocosm and the microcosm of the human being are in some fundamental underlying unity, that, as Plotinus says, everything breathes together, everything is interconnected, and that there isn't a kind of cutoff between a meaning-seeking and capable human consciousness and an unconscious, mechanistic, objective world, which just seems untenable with more and more evidence that we have.
Wonderful, Rick. What a wonderful overview. I've been immersed today in reading some of your writings on archetypes, and you put it so clearly and so well.
Thank you.
I'm reflecting on how it relates to morphic resonance. So, morphic resonance is, as you know, the idea there's a kind of memory inherent in nature, and that nature is governed by habits. Everything has habits, and nature is also made up of many different levels of organization, each of which has its own organizing fields and habits. So atoms and molecules and crystals have their particular habits, and when you make a new chemical compound and crystallize it, you can actually see the habits change as it crystallizes more readily, as the habits build up. We have habits, and we have collective habits and collective memories, which I think underlie what Jung called the collective unconscious. But it's not specific to humans. All species have collective memories, and indeed, all kinds of things, crystals, molecules, have collective memories too. So Jung's concept of archetypal patterns which transcend the individual, which are there before the individual appears and after the individual disappears, fit very well with this idea of morphic resonance, which to some degree is a little bit like Plato's idea of archetypes, of eternal forms, except what makes it different is it's radically evolutionary, and it's Aristotelian rather than Platonic. I'm suggesting that each species has these collective memories that evolve. They weren't all there at the moment of the Big Bang, like kind of Platonic ideas of the dinosaurs and of all other species that have come into existence, whether they've existed or not. Rather, they have a memory within them, the habits of nature build up. So we have collective memories, and those memories include the interactions of our ancestors with their environment, with plants and animals, with the moon, with the sun, and with planets, when people became aware of planets and their planetary motions and began to think about their influences. So there's a kind of collective memory relating to the heavenly bodies as well, the human experience of these heavenly bodies, the collective experience of them, and also the more sophisticated understanding of them that came about when people started paying attention, astronomical attention to the planets. There's also, in the way I'm thinking about it, the idea that these planets themselves, insofar as they're self-organizing systems, and the sun, and the entire solar system, and the entire galaxy also have memories based on what's happened in the past and working by morphic resonance. I argue that our own memories are not stored in our brains as the materialist assumption takes for granted, but rather we resonate with ourselves in the past, and we have our own memories because we're more similar to ourselves in the past than to other people. But we also resonate with other people, which is where the collective unconscious comes in, the collective memories. So I'm suggesting the sun has a memory, that that Jupiter has a memory, that Saturn has a memory, based on their actual patterns of self-organizing activity in the past. Maybe the entire cosmos has a memory, probably it does. The entire galaxy has a memory, and the solar system may have a memory as a system. And as the planets revolve around the sun and enter into different mutual relationships with each other and with the sun, and planets with moons like ours, these patterns themselves may have a memory. And there could even be collective memory of solar systems. If there are similar solar systems to our own or similar planets to our own, they could also have collective memories which influence what happens here on Earth. So the picture, as I see it, fits remarkably well with the picture you sketched out, starting from both astrology and from a Jungian perspective, and also, of course, a holistic perspective on nature as opposed to a reductionist or mechanistic perspective. And of course, that's something we both shared for a very long time.
Yes, it goes back, I think for the first time we met it was in Big Sur in the early 80s, right after your first book came out. And it was about 40 years ago, about at that time, almost 40. And we start off with a number of shared convictions, and but coming from such different, from such, you more from the study of the physical sciences, but with I would say with an ensouled vision, and I come out of depth psychology, but also kind of moving towards the cosmos and the natural world to reunite with the ground, as it were. I would like to explore something from the very beginning with your rendering of the idea of morphic fields and morphic resonance, which I embraced immediately upon reading your first book. It just had an immediate persuasiveness and self-evidence. And I quite agree with you about the nature of the forms that are at play in morphic resonance and morphic fields, that they have an Aristotelian quality rather than, at least at an obvious level, a Platonic quality, and that Plato's emphasis on the eternal, the transcendent, the tending towards more of a static view of the form is, I think of Plato as being the necessary step to Aristotle. He takes in the Platonic formal approach to understanding the world, and then makes it more immanent, as in the great Raphael painting, of Aristotle gesturing towards this world, while Plato has his hand pointed towards the transcendent. That in the School of Athens, that famous painting in the Vatican by Raphael, and Aristotle also brings in this quality of dynamism, of growth, of gestation, and actualization of the potential as the acorn becomes the mature oak, or the young, the fetus, or the young infant and baby girl becomes a mature woman, and so forth. So at the same time, in my study of the planetary archetypes, which are the ones that planetary archetypes and the solar and lunar principle, as we see them at work empirically in the realm of both depth psychology, but also close study of biography, cultural history, and so forth, it seems to me that these principles, these patterns, these archetypal essences or forms can be understood in multiple dimensions. So they can always be experienced as something that is like a person could come into a non-ordinary state of consciousness and have a revelation of a god or a goddess that's quite powerful. The experience of Kali or of Aphrodite or of Prometheus or Pele can be so vivid ontologically that, or at least phenomenologically, that it's as real or more real than you and I looking at each other in our usual interactions. So, and then at the same time, those gods and goddesses seem to be able to be also experienced in a conceptual way, in more the Platonic form, as these enduring essences that in some sense do transcend all time and space, and yet instantiate themselves in concrete events and phenomena. And then they also they can evolve, and there's a quality of teleological actualization in the Aristotelian sense, and there's a sense of also watching an archetypal power or form evolve as time passes. For example, in the human realm, how I would say something like an archetypal feminine has been going through a very, very powerful evolution over time. There's something enduring about it that transcends time, about feminine or masculine or many other archetypes. But there's also a participatory quality to it. There and an openness, an indeterminate openness or susceptibility to being enacted in multiple ways over time, and that that's where in the human realm, human consciousness can play a role in inflecting the expression or enactment of that archetypal form in ways that are more profound rather than trivial, or more noble rather than ignoble. This is where our agency, our moral agency and responsibility can come in and play a role, for example. So in that sense, I see archetypes as simultaneously having a kind of Platonic dimension, a mythological expression, an Aristotelian potential, and an evolutionary form of a that could take, that is explicated beautifully in a Sheldrakean frame of reference. So I don't know. That's kind of how I wrap my mind around this mystery.
Very good. That's really very great way of putting it. And I myself have been exploring in recent months, because of the enforced sabbatical we've all had, revisiting some of my work at Cambridge in the 1970s on the nature of aging and death and growth at the cellular level. And one of the things that's become clearer to me is that many of these biological archetypes are actually already present in the cellular level, that at the level of cells age, and all cells, if they stop dividing, they age, and sort of junk products build up and wear and tear takes place, and they die. The only way they can escape death is by growing and by diluting the seeds of death, as it were, that build up within them. And the way they can do that most effectively is by dividing asymmetrically, so that one of the daughter cells inherits the breakdown products, the toxic wastes, and soon dies. And the other one is regenerated, rejuvenated at the expense of the other. This is a pattern that happens in mammalian stem cells, in plant stem cells, and all over, even in unicellular organisms. But the most interesting aspect of it is in relation to sex cells. And in plants and animals, male and female cells have evolved independently, but both of them show a similar pattern. In the formation of an egg cell, which has to be the most supremely rejuvenated cell of the whole body, because a whole new organism grows from it. So the slate has to be wiped clean. The egg cell formation in animals and plants involves meiosis, the division, two successive cell divisions giving rise to 4 cells. But in the case of egg cells, they're incredibly asymmetric, extremely asymmetric, and 3 of those cells die very quickly. They're called polar bodies in mammals, small dark cells that last a few hours. In plants, a very similar process happens. But in the formation of male gametes, pollen grains and sperm, meiotic division gives rise to 4 equal cells. And the production of pollen and sperm is prodigious. I mean, each organism produces millions, hundreds of millions, billions of pollen grains or sperm cells. So they're equal in the sense that they're not surrounded by dying brothers, but they're in intense competition out of every male ejaculation. You know, tens of millions of sperm and only one makes it. But there's a single egg cell waiting for it, for the lucky one. But that egg cell in its production is bathed in dying cells. So the female cells are bathed in the death of their sisters and nutritive tissues all around them. So anyway, I've been reflecting on these at the cellular level, and I think some of these biological archetypes are very, very deep in biology, and we can see them, as you say, at different levels, not just at the level of whole organisms, but also at the level of cells.
Yeah. That's very, very vivid portrait. You might be interested that our mutual friend Stanislav Grof, who I know Soledad knows as well, Stan had a particularly powerful LSD experience around 1970, in which he experienced being at the cellular level in the sperm race for moving towards his own conception. And he described it in quite vivid terms, kind of not unlike what you were describing, and felt that there were also many factors seemed to be at work. He was kind of, as he was feeling the movement of it in his own body experience of it, he was also getting the sense that there were kind of invisible forces at work that were influencing the race, so to speak, and that he was involved in, including, by the way, astrological forces, which he at that point had no evidence to support, but this was his kind of this intuition in the experience. Anyway, he said that when the successful when he made it to the egg and was the one that was received, he said the experience of personal triumph, if that's the best word, personal or individual triumph, victory, was so great that he said it's like no Olympic gold medals could compare with that level of triumph, and then he was taking in the fact that every single living human being has already won that race, that we all have in us that profound kind of archetypal moment of triumph against great odds to have the sacred marriage, as it were, take place.
Very, very good. I didn't know that about Stan's experience. Incidentally, there's also a political aspect to this archetype, which is particularly relevant to the United States, which is, it occurred to me once when I was looking at there was some presidential primaries going on, and I was looking at a cartoon, and there were all the candidates running towards the finishing post. And I thought, this is just like a sperm race. They were all men, of course. And the mythology of the US is that anyone can become president from log house to log cabin to White House. So there's potentially millions of potential contenders. We know it's not really like that, but that's the kind of mythology. And so there's the idea that the one who makes it would be the final one who gets there to the egg. And then I realized, where do they actually get when the sperm that wins the sperm race for the presidential election? Where do they end up? The Oval Office. So I think that the archetypal psychology of the United States so far has prevented a woman being able to run for president. And unless something's done in terms of archetypal revisioning, it may continue to do so, because I think this is very, very deeply embedded. I don't spend a lot of my time thinking in terms of archetypes explicitly, but reading your essays has sort of reactivated this side, and it's a very productive and helpful way of looking at things.
And also I was thinking that there are many studies, in particular in traditional astrology, about the relationship of the natal chart of planetary configuration and the shape of the body, for example, how it is related also with the biological material body, not only psychologically, So I would like to expand on this, but before, I would like if you can define and distinguish some concepts that you have been mentioning, like soul, consciousness, and intelligence. And yeah, first of all, I would like to distinguish these terms.
I think I'd give that one to Rupert to begin with, anyway.
Oh, well, this is not very easy because the meaning of the word soul has changed so much in the course of the last 2,500 years in European thought. And then, you know, Indian thought has lots of other theories, but I'll stick to Europe since we don't have time to cover all the possible interpretations, Egyptian, Indian, etc. In Aristotle, who is a major influence on biological and theological and philosophical thought in Europe, the soul was the principle of life, which gives form, shape, structure, and organization to living beings. And among living beings, he included plants, of course, animals, humans, but also planets and stars. He followed Plato in thinking that the stars were living. Plato called them living God, visible gods, that they're living beings with minds of their own, or at least souls of their own. And Aristotle had three levels of the soul. The first level gives form to the body. It's the formal cause in terms of Aristotelian analysis of causation. It's what shapes the developing body. And in modern biology, the closest equivalent is the concept of morphogenetic fields, form-shaping fields. In many ways, in modern science, the concept of fields has taken over from souls as organizing structures that give form, order to processes. They organize nature, energy. He thought in terms of prime matter, which is the stuff of which forms and things in nature are made, but which itself doesn't have any formal structure. It's what is organized. And in modern science, energy has very much that role. Energy can take many forms. The energy in an electric plug can power a computer or a hairdryer or any number of devices. And the energy of the sunlight falling on a garden, if it falls on one species leaves, it will empower the growth of, say, an oak tree, or it might fall on a foxglove leaf and it empowers the growth of a foxglove. And if there's food on the table, I eat one slice of bread that you might have ate, well, in your case, it would have powered your thoughts. In my case, it powers my thoughts by enabling my brain to function energetically. So souls have this formative role, which fields do in modern science and for morphogenetic fields in biology. Then, so they shape the forms of animals and plants. Then in the case of animals, which are beings with souls, by definition, the English word animal comes from the Latin word animal, which comes from the word anima, meaning soul. So animals are beings with souls. They're not inanimate mechanisms, as Descartes supposed, and as our factory farming, industrial, agricultural people assume. That they're beings with animating souls that underlie their sensations, organize their movements and their instincts. Humans have vegetative souls shaping the body and maintaining and repairing the body after damage, animal souls that give us our animal instincts. We, like animals, experience fear, erotic attraction. We have taste and smell and vision. Many of our abilities and senses are similar to those of animals, and emotions. But in addition, we have the rational soul, or the intellect, which is to do with the organization of thoughts and language. And in the Middle Ages, St. Thomas Aquinas integrated this view with the Christian theological, a grand structure of Christian theology, and human souls were part of this picture. At one level, they related to the animal and the vegetative level, which is to do with our body, our emotions, our animal nature. At the other side, the soul related to the divine, the spiritual soul, open to the divine consciousness and presence. So that's how I think of the soul in traditional terms. In modern terms, most people haven't the faintest idea what they mean by the word, because it's just a hopeless jumble. It's usually taken to be something that's mysterious and doesn't fit within science. And then you get the idea that psychic phenomena like telepathy which animals also have, are something to do with the soul. The very word indicates that they're psychic. But then that gets blurred with religious and mystical experiences, spiritual experiences. The psychic and the spiritual get blurred. And materialists, who are often atheists, reject the psychic because they want to reject the spiritual, and just reject everything except the mechanistic. And so they're lumped together in a very unhelpful way. So I would say then that the role of consciousness, as I understand it, the soul is largely unconscious. We're beings, we're creatures of habit. Most of our mental life is unconscious. Most of our habits are unconscious. It's very important that they are. We can't think about everything we do all the time. When I'm speaking English, my words just come out. My thoughts just translate automatically into words. It's very habitual for me to speak English. If I speak Hindi, which I don't know so well and don't have as much practice in speaking, when I'm speaking Hindi, I speak slowly and hesitantly because I'm searching my vocabulary for the words. I don't have those habits so well developed unless I've been in India for a few months and they come back. But most of our mental life is unconscious, but our conscious minds are mainly there, I think, to decide among possible actions. So consciousness is about the realm of possibility and the choices among possible actions. And I think in that sense, animals have a conscious life. When a bee flies into a garden and there are lots and lots of different flowers there of different shapes and sizes, colors and smells, and even of a particular species, like say foxglove flowers, the bee has to decide which one to go and alight on and collect pollen and nectar from. It's making choices all the time. And I think that those are happening within a realm of conscious choice. I think consciousness is about the choice between possibilities. So that in a nutshell is how I deal with those, but that hasn't dealt with the part of your question about heavenly bodies. But perhaps we better see what Rick thinks about the soul first, and then we'll come back to heavenly bodies.
Thank you for, we're in the course of our time together here, we're getting these rapid surveys of the history of Western thought, taken from different angles, and by the time we're done, we'll have a small liberal education here for each of us. Soul has gone through so many. I mean, it had a different meaning for Homer than it did for Plato, and then Aristotle, and then, as you say, Thomas Aquinas, etc. And then, of course, the Romantics bring in a new focus on the imagination, the richness of the depth of the creative imagination as having spiritual significance and participating in the divine creativity in the as Coleridge would and Schelling would have framed it. And so, and of course, we also have the sense of soul here in the United States, and I think also in the UK, perhaps in the rest of Europe as well, South America. There is a sense of soul within popular culture. Soul has something that is particularly brought in to American music. We call it soul music, is African American music that has a certain depth of emotion and sensuous physicality, rhythmic potency, but above all, emotional and even passionate depth and yearning. So all those are there, and I think I probably use the word soul in different. If I'm speaking to a Jungian audience or an audience that's been affected by James Hillman's work, which he's very much focused on soul, I would use it in one form, often in distinction from spirit, as Hillman did. Spirit being, more transcendent, more unitive; soul being more embodied, situated in the world of interpersonal relations and feeling and imperfection, and the sublunary realm versus the spiritual transcendent dimensions. But just briefly, I would say that soul, consciousness, and intelligence I think of as being three expressions of, or enactments, or inflections of sentience. In a sense, cosmic sentience that can be take the form of soul in the several ways that Rupert and I have brought in. Consciousness brings in a perhaps a more a more focused meaning, a meaning of being a focus, especially if you bring in consciousness as being self-reflective and having executive agency. And then intelligence is yet another expression of it. Intelligence was, for Aristotle, part of the soul as well, the intellectus. So relating these to the astrological evidence, the fact that for people who have the competence to be able to study the archetypal patternings of human experience in history, in biography, and so forth, in specific experiences, and can track, they know enough astronomy to be able to track the planetary movements, the nature of the geometrical alignments that are at work, and also are able to think symbolically, who have an archetypal eye, as Hillman would call it, who have cultivated that capacity for imaginative discernment, which is not something that a good part of our education has cultivated. I think one of the problems is that the mainstream scientific imagination has kind of cut off its capacity for multidimensional symbolic discernment. They need things to be more concrete, linear, atomistic, and of course, there are many impulses at work at the cutting edge of the different sciences that are militating against that and bringing in a much more richly complex view. But the tendency has been in the modern university for the humanities to be carrying the capacity for multivalent symbolic discernment, while the sciences carry the greater capacity for a certain type of empirical and rational rigor. And I think we need a conjunctio of the two for there to be, to overcome the schism between the two cultures, as C.P. Snow referred to this kind of division within the modern university, the modern cultural intelligence. So if we look at the astrological evidence, it's very hard to come away from it without the conviction that, as Stan Groff has said, there seems to be at work an intelligence of such vastness and potency and complexity that the human mind can't wrap its mind around it. It's too astonishingly, its magnitude and profundity are beyond our finite capacity. The fact that each person seems to be born at a certain time in which the movements of the planets and their positions relative to the Earth at that moment are then somehow carried into life in a way that can be understood in terms of archetypal patterns that are correlated quite evidently with the birth chart of the planetary positions, and then as the planets keep moving, that they and they form different relationships to the birth chart, which we call transits, that there is a kind of activation of the potential within the natal chart or horoscope that keeps realizing or actualizing what is there in ways that are specific to whatever is the planetary alignment that is operative at that point. And then the fact that we are all embedded in a larger field of planetary movements at any given moment for a decade at a time in some planetary alignments, like the outer planets, like the conjunction of Pluto and Uranus during the 1960s, for example, the entire decade. This points to the idea of there being a collective archetypal field that we all are participating in and that shapes the zeitgeist, but then each of us is getting our own individuated inflection of it according to how that larger field is interacting with our personal kind of crystallization of the whole in the birth reflected in the birth chart. And all this points to a kind of vast intelligence that seems to be orchestrating the patternings of the macrocosm in relationship to the microcosm of each human being, of every moment, and also of the earth itself, that the earth is not just a kind of meaningless speck of dust in the vast cosmic void, moving around a relatively undistinguished star at the edge of one of billions and billions of galaxies, but seems to be a center, a focus of evolving cosmic meaning. And so all these point to, for me, to the conviction that the universe itself, and in some sense perhaps the solar system and the galaxy, are conscious, intelligent. We are participating in it. We seem to also have a responsible role in it, like the creative agency plays a role in what archetypal expressions are enacted. And bottom line, it suggests that the universe cares about the earth. Care is not something you run into in most cosmological discussions about what the earth's role is in the larger scheme of things. But the evidence from archetypal astrology points very strongly to the idea that there seems to be something about the cosmos that cares about the earth, that it's like constantly bathing the earth with meanings and purposes that are complexly interacting with each other and being and flowering and being embodied in our own consciousness and actions and so forth. So it's a kind of, that's how consciousness and intelligence and soul work out for me at the cosmological level, on the basis of what started as just studying depth psychology and then connecting it with the movements of the planets.
Yeah, Richard, in addition, you suggest that one can communicate somehow with these planetary archetypes, or that you both were talking about planets as gods and goddesses. So taking into account these notions about the archetypal eye or imagination, and the idea that you suggest that we can communicate or engage in a participatory dialogue with planets or the memory of the planets. I was wondering how maybe Rupert's research on telepathy and the extended mind can relate with all these notions. of communication with the planets?
Well, the telepathy typically occurs between bonded members of social groups. So, for example, members of wolf packs are telepathically communicating over hundreds of miles when they're separated. People who are bonded with their dogs have dogs often that know when they're coming home because they pick up their intentions. Mothers who are away from their babies may feel when their baby needs them. And someone who wants to get in touch with someone by phone thinks about them, gets out the phone, dials them, and while they're doing that, the other person starts thinking about them. So when they ring, they say, "It's funny, I was just thinking about you." Or when somebody who's closely bonded someone dies, even hundreds of miles away, people may feel something, they may feel their presence or know they've died. All these are very relatively common forms of telepathy, and all of them involve connections between bonded members of social groups. So, but what they do show is that there can be a transfer of information, usually an expression of need or calls across space between separated people. Now, when it comes to possible communication with planetary bodies, or indeed the wider linking of human consciousness with other forms of consciousness in and beyond the universe, then the form of communication, again, is likely to be more akin to telepathy than ordinary conversation on the telephone or through a Zoom call or something. And if you think about the practice of petitionary prayer, which is common to all religions and in many shamanic traditions as well, when people pray, and most people in the world do pray, even in a secular society like Britain, far more people pray than go to church. It's quite a common practice, especially when people are in need. They pray. And I pray myself every day. It's just part of my spiritual practice. I meditate in the mornings and I pray in the evenings. And when I pray, because I'm a practicing Christian, I pray to God the Father or God the Son or God the Holy Spirit or to the angels or to the saints. And among the angels, in the traditional Western classification of the angels, the middle three, there's 9 levels of angels. The middle 3 levels are the intelligences of the heavenly bodies. And so there are these intelligences that are a part of the Judeo-Christian and Islamic worldview. In Hinduism, they're called devas. There are innumerable intelligences in nature to whom we can relate. All prayers begin with an invocation. So you start with invoking the being to which you're praying. And it's interesting that in the practice of normal Hindu practice, which I was fascinated by, I lived in India for 7 years, had a big impact on me. The Gayatri mantra, one of their principal mantras in the whole of Hinduism, is an invocation to the sun for the glorious light of the sun to illuminate our meditation. And many Hindus, I saw it myself with many people in sacred rivers, Brahmins particularly, would go into the river just before dawn, immerse themselves in the river 3 times, then come up and facing the sun with their hands together, would chant the Gayatri mantra. They're chanting to the sun, they're invoking the sun, asking for its help and blessing. And I have to say, I myself do that too. I mean, the Gayatri mantra is a very powerful invocation. And I also do another Indian practice, which millions of people do, Surya Namaskar, or salutation to the sun. It's a yoga practice of prostration and greeting of the sun. I do it every morning, have done for more than 40 years. And this is a way of relating to the sun. And this is a traditional practice for millions of people, hundreds of millions of people. It's a way of relating to the heavenly bodies through, not exactly through telepathy, but through a prayer. And if insofar as the prayer works, it involves establishing a bond with the body, like telepathy in the biological realm does. First, establishing a bond, you have to invoke the consciousness to which you're relating. And then there's a form of communication in any form of prayer, which is much more akin to telepathy than anything else. I mean, for the billions of people who pray on a regular basis all around the world, when they say their prayers, as I do mine, I start with the Our Father, and then the Hail Mary, and then I pray in a more free form. But when I'm praying, I'm silent. Anyone who comes into the room would just see me sitting there silently. It's not, there's no sounds coming out. There's the connection is, as it were, through intention and through a kind of telepathic linkage. And it's possible that, I mean, I don't know how many astrologers actually pray to or invoke the planets. I mean, how many of them would actually, I invoke the sun, to some degree the moon. I certainly invoke the God who underlies the entire cosmos and was within and beyond nature. I'm a panentheist. I think God's in nature and nature's in God. I don't know how many astrologers actually address their intentions or prayers to Jupiter or Mars or Venus. I mean,
it's there. There's, as in any community, there's like a range of sensibilities, and there are some that are who have, I've been at astrological conferences that begin with invocations, and certainly in our archetypal cosmology community of about 70 scholars or so that have been working together over the years here in the Bay Area, we often start a meeting or an event of some kind with an acknowledgement, an invocation, often aware of what planets are in the ascendant, so to speak, at that moment, and invoking the particular qualities that much in the way that would have happened in ancient Greece or Rome. On a daily basis, whenever I write, and when I'm in the full throes of writing a book, would be every morning before I start writing. I would say a prayer, not unlike what you described, Rupert. I would say something like angels and muses, gods and goddesses, spirits and ancestors, earth and sky, thou who watches over all things and informs all things, please help me write today. Help me be clear. Help me articulate, and then I go on from there. But I kind of call in the range of invisibles that I know are there and that I depend on for my clarity or my inspiration, etc. And when I give the art and discipline of writing seminars to my students, I highly recommend the importance of you create a sacred space and you and also begin with with some kind of ritual that I think of it as kind of opening the top of the head to much in the way the baby is born with that opening here, to kind of open that connection to whatever sources of higher and deeper inspiration that can come. And anyway, so we're very much in tune on that. I'll share with you. You probably know this, Rupert. There's a great prayer by Thomas Aquinas that I said for many years that I'll share with you after, I'll send to you by email, that goes through the entire hierarchies of the angels and so forth, and then ends with like thou who makest eloquent the tongues of babies, please enlighten the darkness of my mind, help me order the beginning, perfect the completion of this work, etc. It's a beautiful prayer, much more eloquent than I'm capturing right here.
Oh, please do send it. I don't know that one. I'd love to know that.
My father said it every night before studying for the bar exam back 60 years ago, 70 years ago. So the final thing I wanted to say is that in the depth psychology, Jungian tradition, archetypal, transpersonal, is in Stan Grof as well. It's very, very important to engage the deep powers of the psyche that, and we're not thinking of them as just being inside the cranium of the individual human, the skin encapsulated ego, as Alan Watts called it. There's a very important practice that has to do with basically coming into dialogue with the archetypal powers, or whatever is the complexes that are at work inside one, that may be expressing themselves in one's dreams or in one's holotropic breath work, and writing, like sometimes it's writing a dialogue with it in active imagination, which is what Jung did in the Red Book, so much of that. But the important thing is to, as Jung put it, differentiate the contents of the unconscious, in a sense, like be able to name them, and then come into the way I would put it is come into an I-thou relationship with those depths, because there's subjectivities there, and I believe they respond to our approach, just as you and I would respond to another person according to how they approach us. If they approach us as being, a mechanism of no intelligence or spiritual interior, then we'll have a different response to them than if they approach us as being similarly endowed with spiritual and intellectual capacities. And so I think it's the same thing with the archetypal powers. The depths of our unconscious is that if we engage these as an subject to another subject, as an I-thou relationship rather than an I-it relationship, there is a possibility of of communication, of a communion, of a mutual transformation, and so forth. And this probably, in a way, may lead to the final question.
Totally. Yeah. Following this idea you mentioned in one of our last encounter, this potential of transformation when the scientists approach the subject of research in a participatory dialogue or synchronistic dialogue. And that's why I would like to know if you can tell briefly how your research have transformed you throughout time.
I'd love to hear Rupert on that.
Gosh, well, this is a huge question. I'll have to give a very brief summary. I went to, as part of my biological education at school and at Cambridge University, I was indoctrinated with the mechanistic theory of life. It's all a matter of just mechanisms, enzymes, DNA, genes, and the whole question of the research was find the mechanism. However, when I was doing research for my PhD, I got involved in researching on the plant hormone auxin, which is a breakdown product of the amino acid tryptophan. And what I discovered is that the principal hormone in plants that gives growth, life, new roots, new shoots, and leads to the formation of wood cells, is actually produced by dying cells. It's a byproduct of cell death. So death within the plant gives more life. And I recently revisited this. I published a paper, it's called a Darwin Review in the Journal of Experimental Botany just 2 months ago, called The Production of Auxin by Dying Cells, because the evidence has accumulated over the last 45 years, overwhelmingly, to suggest this really is what's going on. This sort of transformed my scientific view because I saw that there was a dimension of where life and death are interrelated. And this led to my interest in aging, which I talked about earlier in our conversation. And this led me to a view where when I was just walking around and seeing how sort of compost is formed and how leaves decay and how the whole process of nature involves these cycles, which are going on all around us and going on in our own lives and our own bodies. It profoundly changed my way of experiencing the world around me and myself. And actually, strangely enough, it only occurred to me relatively recently that my son Merlin, in his book Entangled Life, which is about fungal decomposition and fungal life, in a sense is carrying forwards this same kind of agenda. It's remarkable. He and I are very closely linked and attuned in all sorts of ways, but neither of us had been fully aware of this. And his book, Entangled Life, has extended this kind of organic, connected view of nature to millions of people who would never normally read books on biology or the philosophy of nature. And then when I thought about morphic resonance, I was thinking about how forms could be inherited. I was working on the development of plant form, and particularly the development of leaf veins. And again, I've just completed a paper on the formation of leaf veins. I'm revisiting these subjects because in the light of much later experience and in the light of enormously detailed research within molecular biology, it's possible to go back to these subjects, see them in a new way, a much more detailed way. And that's one of the things I've been doing during lockdown. But when I look at leaves, which I do every day, I look at plants. I spend I garden, I have house plants, I walk in the natural world. And one of my favorite pursuits is looking at plants. I spend part of every day looking at flowers or leaves or trees or plants. And looking at the veins in the leaves, I'm trying to see how they've developed. What's the pattern in which they've appeared? And you can look at young leaves and older leaves and flower buds and flowers. And seeing these developmental processes becomes not just sort of something about what's going on in genes and molecules. Of course, all that's happening. But for me, an actual experience of looking. And I was very inspired to think in a more holistic way about nature by reading Goethe when I was an undergraduate. And he was very against the mechanistic reductionist way of seeing things and wanted to tie in science with personal experience. That had a big effect on me. And I try to do that all the time. I mean, when I'm looking at plants, but also, when I'm looking at the heavenly bodies, the idea that they may be alive and conscious and that one may be able to relate to them, as I talked about the sun earlier, but maybe also stars, like the stars in the constellation of Orion, the prominent stars in the sky, which people have always traditionally thought of as being a particular significance or importance. I think about those and my relationship with them. Because I think that our minds are not confined to our brains, and that when we look at something, our mind reaches out to touch what we look at, which is why at the more mundane level, there's the sense of being stared at, why people can feel when they're being looked at from behind, even though they don't know the person's there by any normal means. I think our minds reach out over literally astronomical distances and connect us to the stars. So when I look at the stars and the planets, I feel this direct interconnection with them. When I do the Surya Namaskar, the yoga prostration to the sun every morning, I always do it facing the sun if I can, or if it's a cloudy day, facing a window in the sky, with a sense of starting the day by relating to the larger cosmos. So for me, these things actually tie together quite well, and I find that this scientific understanding and inquiry actually illuminates my daily experience of nature and of the world around me and of my own life and my own relationships.
That painting of the Pythagoreans celebrating the dawn that I sent you recently, that Hardo sent to us, sent to me, that was that's so evocative of what you're describing, a kind of recognition of the numinosity of the dawn, and what I can very much relate to what you're saying. And having walked with you in the forest one time when we were together at Cawdor Castle, coincidentally, Lady Angelica Countess just texted or wrote me this morning, and I was thinking about how you and I were going for a walk, and then you would leave the trail suddenly and go up to a tree, like Sherlock Holmes on the catching the scent of something, and then look very carefully at it. And I so wished I could be inside to see what you're seeing, because I too look at trees and flowers, and I just yesterday looking at how the trees seem to, they go high up towards the sun and are yearning to take it in, and their limbs are like my limbs, and their fingers. I sense the same energies at work in all the forms of nature in my backyard as I feel inside me when I see a bird or a squirrel. I can feel the four limbs that we are all born with, and so forth. And anyway, the evolutionary inheritance seems very vivid. When you were speaking, Rupert, I couldn't help but think, and you probably have read this beautiful passage in Goethe. Even before you brought up Goethe, I was thinking about that line where he says, "Until you know this deep secret, die and become, you will be a stranger on this dark earth." It so fit with the early research you were doing there and what you were picking up from the botanical inquiry that you were doing. On my in my line of research, it's had an enormous transformational effect. And of course, part of it is that it's been so interwoven with the kind of systematic psychedelic research that I've been doing since 1970, and particularly once Stan Groff and I started working together in 1974 at Esalen. And so, of course, that has a pretty immediate transformational effect on consciousness without anything more needing to be said to those who have had that experience. But in terms of archetypal cosmology and the study of the correlations between the movements of the planets and the patterns of my life or of human experience or of history, that's had an enormous effect on my cosmology, my worldview. It's shifted my sense of what it is to be a human being in the cosmos. I think, I, like many, had gone through periods of my life and my youth where a more existentialist isolation or alienation was, and I think there's an important and even noble element to it in Camus, or in Kafka for that matter, and in certain forms of Dostoevsky is great. He shows the different ways of existentialist skeptic and the mystical devotion within the same family of the Karamazov brothers in dialogue. So I could definitely relate to the more existentially alienated or isolated, or the feeling of being alone in this universe, of being kind of entrapped within mortal finitude, etc. And the combination of both the psychospiritual experiences and the study of the planetary movements and the archetypal patterns just awakened me like a kind of breakthrough into a new cosmos of the fact that this cosmos is ensouled, it's inspirited, it's intelligent, I'm part of it, I'm a child of nature, it's paying attention to me and everyone in us in a certain way, and it is responsive to my my thoughts and my actions. I'm embedded in a meaningful kind of a matrix of profound purposes and meanings that goes right out to beyond my ken in the cosmos. And in that sense, I think it's helped give me, when you combine that with the kind of death rebirth mystery that you have been describing, Rupert, in your recognition within the world of plants and life, and for me, it was particularly coming in through my inner experiences. And we see the world today going through such a catastrophic encounter with a kind of collective mortality, a near-death experience, a kind of spiritual emergency on a global level, with climate change and many other catastrophic things happening. It occurs to me that we are going to need many people who have a sense of being grounded or centered in a perspective that can hold dying and becoming, death and rebirth, and the recognition that we Homo sapiens are part of a much bigger evolutionary experiment that has great intelligence and spiritual depths at work in it, far beyond what we know. And that gives me a trust and a capacity for hope that I wouldn't otherwise have. It's a kind of grounding. And I think I think the world is going to need as many people as possible who can, help keep us, hold a center of equilibrium, of spiritual equilibrium, as we engage the drama of our time. So in that sense, the research has had really profound psychological and spiritual meaning for me.
Mm. He and I obviously agree much more about both in our practice and our worldview than I thought before, because we haven't really had a chance to talk for quite a while, and we haven't talked about our own personal experiences and practices like this before. So it's very illuminating and reassuring, and I'm sure that many other people have found their own ways of relating to the natural world and to their knowledge, to their experience, and to their perceptions. And let's hope that many people who are watching us are also doing something like this in their own lives. I'm sure many are.
I really want to thank you, Soledad, for making this conversation possible and kind of drawing us out on these matters of personal significance to each of us, and the feeling of I've always felt that Rupert was definitely one of the knights at the round table that that we're all relying on in this quest that we're on these days. So thank you for bringing us together, and for also for your important work, Soledad.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Rupert, for your openness and trust again. So this is the end of the first part of this conversation. The second part will be open to the public and based on this conversation. So we will meet very soon again. So thank you very much, Rupert. Thank you very much, Richard, and see you very soon.
Thank you both.